This morning, we are one-on-one with the Chancellor of New York City Schools. Hear what Richard Carranza has to say about efforts to desegregate the school system and why are kids still lagging behind in math and English.
Now, from 42nd and 2nd, this is Pix 11 News Close-Up with Marvin Scott.
Good morning, everyone. This morning's guest has been on the job 6 months. He is at the helm of the largest public school system in the nation with 1.1 million students, 75,000 teachers, and 1,800 schools. Now, when Chancellor Richard Carranza took over the job last April, he faced a system that was not only the largest, but one of the most segregated. Here to talk about that and many other issues, it's good to welcome to Pix 11 News Close-Up, Richard Carranza.
Thank you, Marvin.
You have a daunting challenge. Now, when you came here in April, you said you had a bold plan. You took on the mayor's agenda of equity and excellence for all. That was the agenda. And what it calls for is that 80% of all students by the year 2026 will graduate, and 2/3 of them will go on to college. That seems to be a very strident goal. Are you going to reach it?
Well on our way. I mean, we have the highest graduation rates we've ever had in the history of New York City's public schools. We have more college-going students, in other words, students graduating and going to college than we've ever had. Test scores are on the rise. They've been on the rise now for at least 4 subsequent years. The recent test scores that came out show us significantly outperforming our other large cities counterparts in the state of New York. We have universal pre-K. We now have 3K. So there are some really strong indicators that we are in the right direction in terms of the public schools in New York City.
I want to hear more about that, particularly the new one, the pre-K, the pre-3K, which the mayor initiated just now this year. Is that now in effect?
3K is well underway. It was the last year, and this year we've added more 3K seats, and by 2020 we're going to have universal 3K as well as already universal pre-K. So it's a really good thing for our city and for our families in New York City.
Now the mayor considers that his crowning achievement of the universal pre-K, initiating that in his first term. But you're still faced with the one big problem. New York City in the entire nation has the worst problem as far as accounting its schools integrated. Now, nearly 70%, if my figures are correct, 70% of blacks and Latinos go to schools with racially isolated classrooms. Why does that still exist? There was a Supreme Court decision back in 1955, Brown versus Board of Education, that mandated that all schools all over had to be integrated.
Well, I think across the country, New York is in line with many large school systems across the country. 64 years after Brown versus the Board of Education, in America, we don't have much to show for it. But I think what's different in New York City is that we're actually taking this on head on. I know that since I've arrived in New York City, I've been very, very transparent about the issue of segregation and integrating our schools. The mayor and I speak about this weekly. And I will tell you that as we start looking at what are the systems and structures that have led to that kind of a segregated school system, we're going to take those on.
Now, you came here and you promised a bold, with a capital B, bold action to rectify the problem. You're here 6 months. What have you done?
Well, I think, the mayor and I have already, you got to take on all of the different pieces of that kind of a dichotomous system. So the mayor and I have already proposed a plan for what we think is making it a more enlightened process for admitting students to our specialized schools. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation that has to happen with that. But I've also been part of approving the District 3 integration plan. The mayor and I just approved District 15's integration plan, which removes screens from middle schools. In other words, students can actually go to middle schools without having to submit grades, submit to interviews, submit to portfolios. The simple fact you're a public school student, you get to go to a public middle school. That's a big deal. But
is that moving them from other neighborhoods to go to these other schools?
That's the interesting part. It's actually in their own neighborhoods. So the students in District 15 prior couldn't go to their middle school unless they went through an interview process or they went through some kind of a selection process. Starting this coming year, students will be able to go to those middle schools that are in their own backyard without those kinds of screens. Now, I don't know about you, but public schools should be public schools so that if you live in the neighborhood, you should be able to go to your school.
Now, what you're doing in Brooklyn, is this you're going to the competitive system, this is working with a lottery?
No, it's about applying to your school and where you live.
And in the same neighborhood.
Absolutely.
But what about those who are in the other neighborhoods, in the poorer neighborhoods in this city, where you have more black and Hispanic students, and those are the schools that are not integrated? Are you busing them to other schools in the city that are of higher levels?
Well, we're not busing students. What we're doing is we're investing in the very communities that you speak of. So part of the equity and excellence agenda is really building up those school communities, building up the academic offerings in those communities, the different kinds of programs that we have in those communities. So we're looking at STEM programs, STEAM programs, we're looking at IB programs. So again, we want to bolster the schools that are in students' own neighborhoods, so parents don't feel like they have to leave their neighborhood to go to another school.
Now, when you came here, you said back in April that you and the mayor hadn't seen daylight. That was a quote. You guys on the same page these days?
Well, what I said was there wasn't a lot of daylight philosophically between his positions and my positions. I still believe that. I mean, I'm a big believer in early childhood education, good quality early childhood education. In New York City, we have universal pre-K as well as 3K. You know, there is not another large urban system in America that not only has the kind of universality around pre-K that we have in New York City, but much less even 3K programs to the scale that we have. That's a big deal. So I'm a true believer in that. I'm also a believer that you have to empower communities and you have to be able to give communities voice to have ownership over their schools. The mayor believes that as well. We also believe that you invest in the right things, you're going to get the right kinds of results. So the investments that we've made around creating community schools, investments that we've made around college-going culture and programs, the investments that we've made around really strengthening the academic programs in our schools, these are all evidence of the lack of daylight between the mayor and I.
All right. So where are you kind of like Twilight? Where are you and the mayor? Where are you and the mayor still apart?
Well, I'll tell you, he likes the Red Sox and I love the Yankees. I mean, there you go.
Well, that's a plus, Chancellor. Okay. But where do you still have to move the mayor more to your position?
Well, look, the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city of New York. He has all of the issues under his purview. The mayor hired me because I'm an educator, 30 years in the seat. I'm an educator. This is what I do for a living. So part of my job is to be a good stalwart advisor to the mayor as it pertains to education. My job is to poke holes in what we're doing so that we get better. But so as someone who's a non-pedagogue, as we call ourselves pedagogues, it's my job to bring the mayor into the conversation so that from his much broader perspective, he understands how the schools and education policy work within the broader New York policy framework.
Okay, a lot more to ask you about.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break. I want to find out about teacher accountability, also about the crimes in the school. A lot more to talk about with Schools Chancellor Richard Carranza. We'll be right back. We're back with New York City Schools Chancellor Richard Carranza, and you are a big advocate of parent involvement. That has been an issue in city schools for many, many years, bringing parents in. How are you supportive of the parents who are upset with the current situation in the school system?
Well, I'm not only a supporter of parent involvement, I think it's a parent empowerment that's important. An empowered parent is a parent that has the knowledge to advocate for their child. So knowledge is power, and I think that when you see in some of our historically underserved communities, parents haven't had the knowledge to advocate for their children. They don't know how the system works. Who do I advocate for? How do I enroll my child? What are the options that my child has? So what we've been doing is revamping our whole philosophy on how we engage with parents from a perspective of we want to empower parents with knowledge. We're going out into the communities where parents are. We understand that, you know, it's tough to live in the city sometimes. Parents work 2 jobs to keep a roof over their head. So the more ubiquitous that we can be with that knowledge so that parents have easy access to that knowledge and then support to be able to advocate for their children, the better.
Well, what do you tell and how do you deal with parents who object to their children being assigned to a poorly performing school?
Well, I think one of the things that we've been asking parents to do is there's a lot of rumor, right? You don't want to go to that school or you don't want to go to that school. And many times we've found that parents haven't even stepped foot in this school. They've just heard what other people have said. So the first thing I encourage parents to do is actually go to the school, go meet the principal, go meet some of the teachers, walk the hallway, see what the feeling is like in that school, understand what are the programs they have in the school, what are the before school, the after school programs, what are the enrichment programs. I think parents are going to get a very different perspective of what they've heard the good schools are if they do that one simple thing. In addition to that, we know that parent involvement, parent empowerment makes a huge difference in the culture of a school. So part of being, I think, being in New York, New Yorkers don't run away from these kinds of things. Hey, my child's going, your child's going, we're all going to this school.
But some parents are running away, in fact.
Yep.
Some parents who are not pleased with the school system in their neighborhoods, they're moving elsewhere and going and putting their kids in lily white schools.
So again, it's really a values conversation for us as New Yorkers. Do we believe that all schools in New York City should be great choices for their students in their neighborhoods? I think yes. And the only way to break that is, again, to stop listening to the word on the street and actually go into those schools, actually experience what they look like, and at the same time, work with us as we're empowering and really building up these schools in these communities so that we have great options in every single community.
Let me direct now towards, there are 8 schools in the city: higher education, special education, the elite schools, and it's based upon test scores to get into those schools. The mayor wants to change that. He wants to bring more of the minorities. He wants to bring more Black, Latino into those schools, eliminating tests. Do you support that?
Yeah, but I need to clarify what we're talking about. So there are 8 specialized schools in New York City. Just keep it in context. In the entire United States, there are 165 specialized schools. 165. Of the 165 schools across the country, there are 8 that use a single test score to admit students to those schools. All 8 of them are New York. So either the rest of the United States is completely not on solid ground. Do it? They use a full picture of a student. So they don't use just a single test score. Some of them have a test score, some of them don't. But they use students' grades in school. So how are they doing in their English class, their math class, their social studies, science class? Some of them use letters of recommendation. Some of them use different methodology. The point that the mayor is making and that I am making is that a single test that is not aligned to the state standards, it's kind of ironic. We spent a lot of time talking about, well, how did the students do on the state test scores? But yet a student that aces their state test scores does extremely well in all of their middle school classes, their English, science, social studies, math class, gets straight A's, have perfect attendance, never get in trouble. None of that matters. They have to take one test on one day for 3 hours, and that test isn't even aligned to state standards. And depending on how they do on that test, determines whether they have the opportunity.
So what would the criteria be under the mayor's plan now?
Well, under our plan, what we're saying is get rid of the test because it's not aligned, it's not valid, it's not valid or reliable. And instead, let's look at how students are doing in their classes in their middle schools. The 4 classes that I talked about, the core classes: English, math, science, social studies. Let's do a composite score. Let's rank the students. And if you're in the top 3% of your middle school, in every middle school, you have the opportunity to go to a specialized school.
Now, Chancellor, that sounds to me like some program we had here in the past called the Honors Program. You advanced on your abilities.
Absolutely.
But they abandoned that in the 90s. Why? Are you going back to the Honors Program?
Well, I wasn't here in the 90s, but I'll tell you.
But it was called the Honors Program, and students advanced based on their abilities.
Sure. So I think that's a much fairer way of identifying students that have the capabilities to go to the specialized schools. Now, folks that have concerns with that are going to say, well, you're just dumbing down the schools. I just don't agree with the fact that if you have more opportunity, you're lowering the standard for any school. I think it's a much more fair, but I think accurate way of giving students opportunities to go to a school that's specialized if that's what they want to do.
I want to bring up something else. The mayor is vehemently opposed to it. Charter schools. There are charter schools that have shown that students are excelling, doing exceedingly well. He is resistant to any expansion of any charter schools. You, if I've read correctly, are not close to it. What do you think?
Well, I'm an educator, so what I'm looking at is what are the instructional practices in all schools. Since I've arrived in New York City, I've gone and visited charter schools, a wide variety of charter schools. I've met with charter school leaders, and we've had conversations. There are many things that we agree upon in terms of what's good for children. There are some things that I just don't agree with either. But I think the conversation should be, how are we, if charter schools are doing what they purport to do, then how are we working together to learn from each other? I think there's also a conversation to be had about what do we consider doing well. Is a test score the sole determinant of whether or not we think a school is doing well? I don't think so. So what's the environment in the school? What are the opportunities kids have in the school? Do they have an opportunity to have science and discovery kinds of programs? Do they have music programs? Do they have dance programs? So I think there's a much broader conversation around what is a good school. And in my book, it's not just a determinant of how they do on a standardized test score.
But it's still the education process seems to be more superior to what we have in the public schools.
I would disagree with you, sir. We agree on a lot of things, but I would disagree with you on that. It's the test scores are not an indicator of what is superior or not. It just tells you that.
But just the whole education process. I'm not talking about just test scores.
But we have some great education in New York City's public schools. I mean, you just talked about the specialized schools. People are clamoring to get into some of those specialized schools. I'll tell you about Aviation High School that has no screening at all.
What about expanding seats and having more of these specialized schools, more than 8?
Well, why are we talking about expanding specialized schools instead of talking about how do we improve all schools?
That's a good question.
Absolutely.
Okay. The answer?
And the answer is that's exactly what we're doing. We should have thought of that. Of course, that's what we're doing. We're doing that every single day. We're doing it. We're doing with early literacy. We're doing that with our expanded literacy. We're doing that with our pre-K program. We're doing that with the different kinds of academies that we have in our high schools. We're doing that with our international baccalaureate programs that we're putting into our middle schools. There's a number of things that we're doing in the New York City public schools that is doing just that.
I gather what you're saying is a lot of these statistics and these numbers we're hearing are based on test results, because there was a report just out this week that stated that charter schools are outperforming state averages in other schools. So again, you're saying that's based on test scores.
Based on test scores. Now, is it important to know how students are doing academically? Absolutely, it's important, but it's one of many things that we should be looking at to judge a healthy school.
Okay. I'm going to give you a little recess for a second. We're going to take a break. Have more questions for Schools Chancellor Richard Carranza when Pix 11 News Close-Up continues. Stay with us. Back now with Schools Chancellor Richard Carranza, and in political debates they call these the lightning round. So a lot of issues we haven't gotten to, we have limited time. Let's begin with renewal schools. These are schools that are underperforming in the city, and there are several dozen of them. What are you doing about those?
Well, we're continuing to support those schools. The research says anywhere from 5 to 7 years to really turn around schools. We've done that in less than 3. Many of those renewal schools have risen out of the renewal category into rise. Our recent accountability results from the state show that those rise schools are performing at a faster pace than the rest of the school system. So some things are being done right. Learned a lot of lessons, and we're revamping what we're doing with the rest of renewal schools, but we continue to have a focus on making sure that those schools will be good places for students.
Another one of your challenges after 6 months. Talk about something I found very shocking, that there are 110,000 students, about 1% of the student population that is homeless. Mm-hmm. What are you doing about that?
Well, you know, schools are a microcosm of the greater society, and as homelessness increases in the city, so do we have students in temporary housing and homeless. What we've done is a number of things. We're working very closely. I'm working very closely with Commissioner Banks. So what we did this summer is we actually went out and talked to families in temporary housing and shelters, and what we did is we asked them if they wanted to move closer to their schools. In other words, move their shelter to another placement that's closer to their schools. We got hundreds of families to do that, which reduced the amount of travel for their students. We're providing transportation for those students in homeless shelters to their schools. We actually have social workers and counselors that are embedded in those shelters as well to provide support to those students. We have tutoring services in those shelters. So what we're trying to do is really bring the services to the students regardless of where they're living. The other thing that we're doing is in our schools being very, very targeted about supporting those students and making sure that they have the support systems to be successful in school as well.
Another problem you've got, there's been a spike in sex crimes in school. and also in felony arrests, like I think for the figure 138% increase in felony crimes in schools just recently.
Well, we're a microcosm of the bigger society, like I mentioned, but what we've done is we've made sure that there are no incidences that are not being reported. So while it may be very shocking that you've seen a slight increase, some of that is that we're being very true about what is happening and what's being reported. That being said, we have a number of programs and interventions. We have a new sex ed curriculum that we're implementing. We have health teachers and health classes that are really talking about what students should be doing to protect themselves and know their rights. So again, we're taking this head on, but the biggest thing is we work with the finest experts in the world around safety and positive environments. It's the New York Police Department. So we work closely with NYPD around making sure that we're not only taking into account those statistics, but we're working on proactive measures to curtail that as well.
Talk about something else, teacher accountability. Still having a difficult time removing teachers of tenure who are underperforming, aren't you?
Well, teachers have rights to their positions, and there's due process.
But if they're not performing,
there's a process to do that. And you know, I would much rather talk about what we are doing and seeing a real increase in is that we're providing the professional development for teachers to build their capacity to meet the unique needs of teaching students in a large urban environment. And we've really ramped up building capacity. And as you build capacity, you get better practice. Now, the issue of an underperforming teacher, there are processes involved to document and then to work through a process to remove an underperforming teacher. We're engaged in that too, but I think the bigger story really is about how we're actually having much more success at having effective teaching in our schools.
What are you doing to attract better teachers?
Well, one of the things is we should probably stop talking about how we're going to fire teachers. Who wants to go into a profession where everybody says you're going to be the piñata?
We're talking about the underperforming. we're expecting, you know, a higher level of teachers.
I think nationally, you know, not only in New York City, but everywhere I've worked, there is this real competitive nature for attracting people into the teaching profession. When you consider, for example, some of the hard to fill staffing areas like science teachers or mathematics teachers, with the rise in what we've seen of technology as an industry, not only in the United States, but globally, we're in competition for those math majors and those science majors. They have opportunities in industry. They have opportunities in the tech industry. So for us, you have to really draw people that want and have a burning desire to teach and to work with young people. We're working with our local universities very closely. I'm meeting with their presidents and their deans of their colleges of education around doing just that, creating those pathways to come and teach.
I want to ask you about something that's new. I think this is the first year implementing it. Voter registration in high school for kids turning 18 so they could take part in this year's midterm elections.
Absolutely. We started this last year. It's an initiative Mayor de Blasio was very excited about, Civics for All. This spring, we've registered over 10,000 seniors, high school seniors, to be able to vote. And I think that's part of what we do in school. It's kind of your civic responsibility. So we're really excited about that, and we're going to continue to support our schools in making that happen every year.
All right, you're an educator. You came here from Houston, and you're in New York 6 months. How do you, in your period of time as an educator, how has education changed? Could you give me that 25 seconds or less?
Well, in some ways it hasn't changed, right? So if you took a picture of a classroom in 1879, you would see a room with an adult at the front and desks, kids sitting probably in a row, and somebody's imparting a lesson. You can go to classrooms across the city, you'll probably see the same thing. But what has changed is the ubiquitousness of technology, how we use technology, not to replace teaching, but to enhance the way we teach. Think about this. Our students use technology every single day, except when they go to school sometimes. So how do we implement it?
I see you want your legacy to be the fact that you've turned around our struggling schools and integrated every school in New York City. Richard Carranza, New York City Schools Chancellor, thanks you so much, and I hope we'll see you back here again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That'll do it for our program for this week. If you have any comments or wish to see this broadcast again, log on to our website, pix11.com/newscloseup. I'm Marvin Scott. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone.